relatively smooth transition to OpenGov. We tried it out on Kusama for, I think, 7 months, drained a fair bit of the Treasury, but otherwise, pretty good. Now it's running quite happily on Polkadot. Is there anything you would change about the initial parameters at this point?
Yeah, I definitely think some of the parameters need to be tweaked. I think there's already an RFC that I've put my thoughts regarding.
What are the main points on that?
Certainly reducing some of the decision times on Kusama, changing a few of the curves, changing some of the deposits.
To be more accessible or harder?
More accessible for most of them.
Okay, yeah.
Harder for some more accessible, some harder.
Okay, all right.
I think the bigger spends, the idea is to make it longer. The smaller spends easier. I think for Kusama, really shortening that decision period is a good plan.
Cool.
Try and get things much more sort of reactive and adaptive. I think the biggest alteration needed, and this is something that is being worked on, is just moving away from the central treasury model. So the central treasury needs to exist. Where do you put the funds? But it should be moved out in larger chunks to a more delegated model for individuals that are happy to be delegated to, and obviously the community is happy to be delegated towards, in a manner a little bit reminiscent of Gov1, which is where the council controlled the treasury. So I can well imagine that we might have quite a few such councils controlling a number of different treasuries, a little bit similar to the fellowship. One can imagine a fellowship treasury, or one can also imagine like a marketing fellowship, which has its own treasury.
Sure.
Having multiple treasuries to handle these various different areas of funding is really what we need to strive towards now. So we have, so that we're not constantly asking the wider ecosystem to fund, 3K here and 8K there and 50K. And then as soon as someone says, well, I want 5 million, it's like, well, that will never go through, right?
Yeah.
But the thing is, they will then argue, well, we want a degree of certainty that we will get funded over the next 3 years. And it's like, okay, so something has to give here. And I think the thing that has to give is, well, if you have a longer lived fellowship membership, like, let's say a wallet fellowship that funds wallets, Nova, Sub-Wallet, Talisman, we can imagine there would be a greater level of faith that a team that sort of is building a 18-month, 2-3 year project would have a greater deal of faith that they will get funding for the project's duration. When it is a constrained group of people that are making that decision, rather than any old token holder that sort of might want to come in and have their vote be heard with arbitrary amount of conviction.
Or just their voice, even if sometimes they don't even have a vote, right?
Yeah.
It's a little bit hardcore right now, for sure. We see people ground down to maybe the worst of themselves sometimes. It can be a bit intense, but also good for burning off the things that are useless, the people that are just here to take money.
I definitely, I think there's it's probably like, 20%, 60%, 20%, right? So there's like a 20% hardcore that are never going. There's a 20% that are just opportunistic, that are just here as long as the good times roll. And then there's kind of 60% in the middle that you kind of, it's a bit of both. They're kind of into it, but they kind of also do need, they do want to make a bit of money. They want to, they want to be comfortable. And it's like, it's how deep into the first 20%, you cut loose and that's fine. And then it's like how deep into the next 60% that you're going to cut. And I think, it's not going to be maybe a big issue if you cut into some of this, but you definitely, you want to retain, it's that 60% that some of the sort of crazy ideas that no one really thinks could be that good end up coming from and being developed by. Like the 20% that are going to be there forever, they're a relatively small group of people, and they are, they're dedicated to the underlying mission, but they're not necessarily, they don't number very many, and they're not necessarily going to be thinking too hard outside of this relatively focused sort of mission. Nonetheless, I do believe that there's there's an element in this entire industry that is here really not believing in the underlying goal of like, self-sovereignty, decentralization and so forth, but really just here to make a bit of crypto cash.
Yeah, you can sense it off them.